Welcome everyone to our multi-platform service for the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. For those joining us in person, it's wonderful to have you with us. You will no doubt be glad to know that our COVID task force has determined that masks are no longer necessary in the sanctuary. Masking now is a personal choice. Those who are attending in person are invited to join us in the parish hall for hospitality after the service. And for oh well, okay, just a glitch. These things happen. For those joining us online, we send special greetings to you. We hope you take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat box. After service, you're all invited to join your virtual coffee hour. And for those joining us in person, we gently remind you to please silence your mobile devices at this time. Oh, and here's a reminder. The women's group meets weekly via Zoom on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. You can see Kathy Santo for further information. And now, let us prepare for this morning's service. Come into this place. Come in. Come into this place which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, fears and anxieties, loves and hopes. For here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and are called to be. Come into this place where we can touch and be touched, heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this place. Together, we make it a holy place. I invite you now to join me in lighting the chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite for worship and fellowship. As an extension of lighting our chalice, I want to take a moment of silence to light these 3 candles for some of the names of those who have recently been affected by police brutality. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected. We light a candle for the life of Vaughn Perkins, for the life of Tyree Adam Washington II, and for the life of Rosendo Enrique Rivero. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that Black lives matter. Can't open my pages. Now, please join us in singing hymn number 260 in your gray hymnal. Hymn 260, Now the Green Blade Riseth. Oh, 260. I'm sorry, what is it? 260 is what I have. 256. And this is the time in our service for joys and sorrows. We invite you all to share your joys and sorrows. If you're visiting us for the first time, please introduce yourselves. For those who are gathering in person, we invite you to raise your hand and then stand where you are seated. I will give you the microphone to share your joy or sorrow. We invite you to share what is in your heart. For those who are joining us online, we invite you to type into the chat your joys and sorrows. Ben will read them aloud. We invite you to share what is in your hearts.
Hi, my name is Sally, and yesterday David and I went to a neighborhood party. Like, people are coming out. Our backdoor neighbor, who's been our backdoor neighbor for 44 years, almost 44 years. Yeah, we saw our kids grow up. So there were kids and grandkids and in-laws, and it was like and she turned 80, so it was really fun to see people. I hope it's a new thing that we all do, is meet our neighbors.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I have a couple of things. So the first one is kind of a joy and a sorrow. Yesterday there was a lovely memorial here for Jill Avedon, who was a member of our church many years ago. And it was just lovely. Her daughter gave a very beautiful eulogy. And I just want to say that her daughter donated some of the flowers that were here. And those are the flowers that you see. And the ones on the right were actually sent by Joan and Bob Pipkins for the memorial. So very lovely. The other thing was, I spoke to Larry Schwabacker yesterday. He's still in Golden Gate rehabilitation. His foot is healing, but very slowly. So he's going to be there a long time. And he's really tired of being closed up in that place. So if anybody has any time, you could send a card, you could call him, or even visit if you have time.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dave. I thought I'd just introduce my friend Shunya. Sorry to put you on the spot, Shunya. Since joining us for the first time today, might as well. Yeah, and Jade's finishing up hospitality, so she'll be joining us shortly.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I'm Chris. I just want to report that Bruce Springsteen came to Brooklyn on Monday night, and I was one of the many people there at Barclays with my son and daughter-in-law and their friend Sean, and we just had a great time. Bruce is Bruce.
Oh, by all means.
Hi, I'm Eric, and 4 days ago on April 5th, Ashley turned 13, and we celebrated with an escape room, and we won the escape room. Yeah, our family did an escape room, and we were successful.
Oh, we'll tell you later.
Lisa Mattis says, have a 2-week-old newborn. That's a very big joy.
Congratulations. Wonderful.
And I get the joy of saying that to everyone here.
Yes, indeed. Okay. Anybody else? You all set? Yeah. Thank you. We're grateful for all of these joys and sorrows that we've shared in our community, and for all those and all the others that have gone unspoken. May the attention and care that we give each other and those beyond this space remind us that we're not alone. And now we will pause for meditation. I will offer a quote to focus our meditation and then ring the bell. At that point, I invite you to begin the meditation with 3 deep breaths. After a few minutes, I will ring the bell again to mark the end of our time. Today's quote from Thich Nhat Hanh is as follows: "To love our enemy is impossible. The moment we understand our enemy, we feel compassion toward him or her, and he or she is no longer our enemy." And now we have a reading of the Shanti Deva prayer.
Can you hear me? Shantideva was a Buddhist monk in the 8th century. You'll hear a little bit more about him in a few minutes, but this prayer is adapted from a famous teaching he gave that was made into a text called The Way of the Bodhisattva, or the Bodhikarayavatara. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world.
And this is the time in the service where we take an offering. We know it's the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and grow. For those attending in person, we invite you to drop your offering into the collection plate. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through PayPal, the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can, and our offerings will be gratefully received. Thank you. And this is Rob Lansman and Elle, who are going to perform Everybody Hurts.
When the day is long and the night is yours alone, when you're sure you've had enough of this life, well, hold on. Don't let yourself go. Most everybody cries, and everybody hurts sometimes. Sometimes everything's wrong. Now it's time to sing along when your day is not alone.
please join us in singing hymn 84, Winds Be Still in Your Gray. So sorry, I don't know how that all happened. So we got the right number now? And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, Dr. Kathleen Lyon. Kathleen is a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and student of Tibetan Buddhism. She has been for the past 25 years. She maintains a private practice in New York City and lives in Northeast Pennsylvania with her husband, the Reverend Darrell Berger, and their 2 dogs. Kathleen.
Thank you for having me here. It's an honor and a pleasure. I'm really delighted to be here to speak with you all, and especially on this topic, which is very near and dear to my heart. I came to Buddhism in my mid-30s. I was raised an Episcopalian and was very spiritually engaged as a child. I even went so far as to think I might want to be a priest, which is pretty unusual given that women weren't priests in the Episcopalian faith at that time. But I didn't tell anybody. I was kind of embarrassed to let anybody know. But I became an altar girl. I was very engaged in all of the prayers and practices and whatnot. Took it in as much as I was able as a child. But when I went to college and sort of differentiated and sort of to think my own thoughts, that faith, at least as far as I had absorbed it or had been given it, seemed a little too hierarchical, a little bit too infused with sin to really sit well with me long term. And so I studied existentialism a bit in college. I was in the sciences and went to medical school and did a psychiatry residency, as you've heard, and studied psychoanalysis and became a psychoanalyst. And these were the ways that I engaged with how to live life, what it meant to be a person, and how to really use our potential as human beings. I had met my husband in college, and we married, and while I did my MD in psychiatric training, he did an MD PhD residency and postdoc. He was on the fast track. And we moved to New York City, and he was doing research at Sloan Kettering, but decided that when he saw his older colleagues, some of them losing their jobs or being in very precarious positions because funding was so difficult, he decided he wanted to do a cardiology fellowship, which had been postponed. And logistical and financial concerns meant that meant we would move in with my mother-in-law, which was a spiritual test in and of itself. 2 years later, a year before he finished his fellowship, we had signed a contract on a house, and we were going to move into a home that was our own, where we could commute to our various workplaces. Our daughter would have a good school, and everything was starting to look up. 2 weeks later, he found out he had metastatic cancer, and not a good kind. So that really upended the apple cart. But because I didn't want to go through that in my mother-in-law's home, we pushed forward and had hope, but we kind of knew what the writing on the wall was. 10 months later, he was dead. And I was in a home that I couldn't really afford on my own with a then 11-year-old child. And putting aside, of course, the enormous grief and suffering that was causing us all, the stress and anxiety, the intensity that it brought to both our lives. On a cellular level, kind of like on that basic existential, energetic level, my reaction was something like, huh? Like, what? I was 36 years old at this point, and my whole life was going in an entirely different direction. And what I realized was, and obviously, I mean, I was a thinking person, right? I wasn't naive, but on some basic fundamental level, I was privileged enough and lucky enough to have been able to live a life where I thought if I did the things I was supposed to do and worked hard and applied myself, things would go in the direction I intended. Well, obviously, I got a pretty big lesson about that. We really don't have all that much control. So the question became, as it does for anybody who's really spiritually or philosophically inclined, was how then to live a full, meaningful, and joyful life, knowing there is no certainty, much less control. And that's when I turned to Buddhism, which I'd always been somewhat interested in. But living with empiricist, scientist, made it a little hard to turn to what I thought might be seen kind of like woo-woo or something a little bit fuzzy. A couple of years later, I married Darrell Berger, and of course that helped a lot because he was extraordinarily supportive. We had known Darrell when we had attended his church in New York City when we lived in the neighborhood, and we connected later, and he's always been extraordinarily, of course, as you'd imagine, supportive of my interests. So I'm here to talk today about the place of compassion in Buddhism, and specifically Tibetan Buddhism, which is where I've been studying most of the time. Now, I'd like to define compassion because it's maybe not exactly what everybody thinks. It's not empathy, okay? Empathy is feeling with what another person feels. And that's important and helpful, and we want to be able to do that. But compassion really involves the intention and hopefully the action to relieve suffering. And it's been shown in studies that just feeling with and being empathic with others can ultimately be exhausting and really draining because you feel helpless. But with compassion as a practice, you're given something much more energizing and enlivening and helpful to both you and the person who is the recipient. And this is part of what made my attraction to Buddhism so strong, is because I learned very early on that not only is it a tradition that is centuries, millenniums old, with philosophical debate and study and the study of mind and reality, but it's accompanied by a vast number of practices that really help you bring those insights into living and into your heart and your way of seeing the world and the way of being. So we're going to start today with a practice, a compassion practice called Tonglen, or exchanging the self with others. Giving and receiving is another name for it. And it's going to just take a couple of minutes. We're going to do it a couple of different times. And so I want you to just sit comfortably with your eyes closed if you'd like, or open, but if open, not really focused on anything in particular, just relax your vision. And contact your breath. And imagine in your heart center that there's light, maybe a bright orb of warm, clear light. Now, bring to mind someone, and this someone could be yourself, or someone else very, very close to you who you cherish, for whom you do just about anything to relieve their suffering. And imagine some challenge they might be experiencing, or if you've taken yourself to mind, whatever it is that you've been challenged by, hurt by, distressed by recently. And on the in-breath, breathe in that suffering as a smoky stream that goes into that heart light and just dissolves. You don't have to feel the suffering, you don't have to intensify it or do anything with it. Just let it dissolve into that light. And on the out-breath, breathe out to yourself or that beloved other, whatever is needed to relieve that suffering, to bring happiness, wholeness, well-being. Again, on the in-breath, bringing in that smoky stream of suffering that just disappears in your heart, and returning happiness, well-being, joy. And this can be done, obviously, for as long as you'd like. But we'll stop there for the moment. Tonglen is a deceptively simple practice that contains within it Buddhism's entire profound view of suffering and its remedy. When the Buddha taught, his first teaching was on the Four Noble Truths, one of which is to know suffering. And sometimes people think that sounds depressing, like we're just supposed to, sort of like suffer or, just sort of focus on suffering. That's not what he meant. To know suffering is to know how it occurs, what causes it, which then gives you the information you have in order to relieve it. Like any doctor You have to know the cause, you have to know the mechanism to come up with a cure or even the prevention. So we're going to talk about what suffering is in the Buddhist view. There are 3 levels of suffering. First is the suffering of suffering, which is just like the big stuff that happens in every life. You know, birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? Tree falls on your house. Really bad stuff, right? That could actually endanger your life. You know, the sorts of things of being without a home, without food. These are terrible things that people need to have protection from in order to just live a decently productive and healthy life. Even so, experiencing these terrible forms of suffering can be mitigated by having the kind of equanimity and perspective that Buddhism teaches. The second level of suffering is called the suffering of change. And that's the kind of suffering that we go through because things are always changing. You get what you want and you lose it, right? Or you get what you don't want. You know, you don't get asked to the dance, you get a bad test result, you know, you don't get into the school you want, that kind of thing. And that, you know, we can weather those storms, but sometimes it's tough. And again, you know, with the proper attitude, we can have a bit more resiliency, but it's just sort of what comes with life. And then there's pervasive suffering. And again, this is a suffering that's related to change, but it's the kind of suffering that we all experience in life, kind of on a subliminal level, knowing that nothing ever really gets resolved. Nothing's ever tacked down perfectly forever, right? We wake up in the morning, we don't know what kind of mood we're going to be in. You know, we don't know how the weather's going to be, right? We, on this subliminal level, we realize that this self that we attach our hopes and fears to, this person that we think of as having to be protected, is a dynamic, changing sort of relationship with our surroundings. We don't exist in any kind of inherent way. We're born as babies, we grow old and die. Obviously, we're always changing, right? So kind of like those lumberjacks like that are on rolling logs, you know, on some sort of psychological level, we're always just trying to stay upright. So we're not a stable self. So then what are we? Well, Buddhism tells us what we are, which is that we're Buddhas. We all have Buddha nature. And Buddha nature is the clear, wise awareness and compassion that is the source of all our being, all our knowing. And we only don't contact that and live from that all the time because we have this mistaken view of ourselves. And Tonglen helps us reduce our attachment to this mistaken sense of ourself and self-absorption, and increases our contact with our Buddha nature. Shantideva, who we heard from a little earlier, was this monk in a monastery, and he was sort of underestimated. This is kind of a classic story for some of the Buddhist teachers of the past. You know, they're very modest, they don't show their hand, you know. He was asked to teach and sat down on the teaching throne and stunned everybody by giving a day-long exposition that was transcribed into this book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. And he said many, many things which are still studied in depth today and is an extraordinary book. But one of the things he said was that all the suffering in the world arises from wishing the self to be happy. All the happiness in the world results from wishing others to be happy. And that's the way of the bodhisattva. A bodhisattva dedicates their life to relieving suffering in all sentient beings and optimally bringing all beings to enlightenment. And you don't have to be Buddhist to be a bodhisattva, obviously, right? So I want you to hold on to that statement. All the suffering in the world arises from wishing the self to be happy, and all the happiness in the world results from wishing others to be happy. I'm going to put that aside, and we're going to practice Tonglen again. This time, I want you to bring to mind somebody that's kind of neutral. Maybe the person that you buy coffee from at the Starbucks, or the mailman that you maybe see every so often and wave to. And it's nothing too intense, good or bad. It's just a neutral person. So take a moment, settle in, bring that person to mind. Imagine their life as you can, right? Whatever you might think. Bring to mind a challenge they might be experiencing. Maybe they have long hours and low pay, or have to deliver mail in the rain, or whatever it might be. And again, on the in-breath, bring in that suffering into your heart center and let it dissolve. And on the out-breath, send them whatever might relieve their suffering. On the in-breath, bringing in their pain. On the out-breath, whatever it might be, think big. Whatever could relieve their suffering and bring them joy. Bringing it in, dissolving, and sending it out. So, back to that quote. This is the kind of teaching that can run into some cross-cultural challenges. A lot of us who were raised in an Abrahamic or Judeo-Christian kind of tradition, we're taught that suffering is redemptive, right? Maybe even we've got it coming in some way. The Buddhists view suffering as due to mistaken views, right? Again, that attachment to yourself, that's really the source of suffering. Now, you can obviously take good care of yourself. Nobody's telling you not to go to the doctor or to get a good job or to eat good food or to have fun. It's the attachment to certain outcomes that really trips us up, right? And having a small view, kind of like Scrooge, right? Oh, it's all about me. And remember, with Tonglen, you can start with yourself. Some teachers of Tonglen started with people who had so much trouble with the concept that they would just tell them to take, like an object that they cherish and move it from one hand to the other. That's how basic you can start with the idea of attachment and giving. But what Buddhism is trying to help us see here is that compassion and joy and well-being, it's not a zero-sum game. The more you access it and express it, the more there seems to be for you and for all others. And you can do Tonglen on the spot. You don't have to be sitting on a cushion and doing something special. You can just be in line at the grocery store and somebody pushes in front of you and you feel really irritated, and you can give patience to yourself. You can dissolve your irritation into your own heart and give yourself patience. You can imagine that person's stress and strain and why they're, in such a hurry, and give them ease, time, space, whatever it is that they need, right? And relieve their suffering just on the spot. It's just a practice you can take with you everywhere. Now, if you were doing this formally, you might then go to the third level of Tonglen, which is the one that a lot of us spend most time on, which is somebody who's really giving you a hard time. Somebody, a boss or, a relative who keeps talking about political things that you're not all that thrilled with or whatever it might be. And you open your heart to their suffering, just like the Thich Nhat Hanh quote, which is perfect, right? Once you understand a person's point of view, they're really no longer your enemy. And in fact, you can see how just like you, they're just doing what they think they need to do to protect this mistaken sense of themselves. And, why shouldn't we have compassion for that? So Tonglen is this beautiful, adaptable practice, one that contains the essence of the Buddha's wisdom and which offers access to this living, loving source of our being. I hope you put it in your pocket, take it with you. It's a wonderful companion, whatever life brings. Thank you.
The closing hymn. Please join us in singing in your teal hymnal. Rob, you're going to correct me if this is also labeled incorrectly. I have hymn 1021 in the teal hymnal. Is that correct? Okay, 1021 in your teal hymnal. Lean on me.
Sometimes in our lives we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you. It won't be long, 'cause I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride. If I have wings, you need to go on the road. For no one can fill those of your needs that you want.
I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of unity, the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Kathleen, some words.
For our closing words, I've chosen a dedication of merit that I say, and many, many other practitioners say at the end of a day's practice. Merit is considered anything positive that one gets from practice with oneself or in a group like this. And the dedication increases that merit for oneself and for all beings. So it's considered a really good thing to do. By this merit, may all beings achieve enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be freed from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death.
The postlude. Postlude. And so ends our service. So please join us in the parish hall for hospitality.